fashion, things to wear, possibly faces covered, but more importantly, covering up the bodies. Merch. We have that now. We are very, very excited to announce that Vampire and the Devil have partnered with our friends at Rock and Horror Apparel. They are now taking care of the actual merch, the exclusive merch for the Vampire and Devil podcast, modeled by our very sexy devil right here.
Oh, yeah.
But we have all kinds of goodies to share with you.
Got the hoodies. We got some shirts. We got some tanks coming up. We got some booty shorts. We got all the stuff you want to wear from the Vampire and Devil podcast, thanks to Rock and Horror.
Horns up. Fangs out. All right there, Fangs and Infernos. This is going to be a fun one today, like I say quite often. But as of the recording of this episode, anybody who's familiar with what Devil and I do in our downtime is it is M3 week. It is one of our favorite festivals of the year. So we are really, really stoked to have a little parody, a little bit of playoff, a little bit of tie-in with the M3 festival, and have not only musicians, but referencing musicians onwards and upwards. What do you say we talk a little bit about bands named after movies there, my friend? And Devil, before we get into this, I have something to pitch to you out of a sheer curiosity on your opinion. Now, first and foremost, I must precursor this with, of course, the times were very, very different when it comes to these movies when they came out and like topics that are going to get discussed at these times. Would you go far as to say that this is the potential for another flawless fatality out of these two? Or do you think it doesn't quite measure up for that due to the fact that one of these movies is very much from the 30s and another one is, for lack of a better term, slightly more modern day, but of course still much older and it's still right? Do you find the comparison between these two to be somewhat, straight up in one movie's favor, or do you think the time of the time of these movies' releases has to come into account?
I don't know, because the way that it's implying is that you're implying that the older movie hasn't aged as well as the newer movie, and I'm
Ah,
actually on the spectrum of the opposite way. I think
cool.
that the older movie actually holds up better and looks better than the. When I watched both of them, I'm like, you know what? For being 30-year difference, White Zombie is actually a better looking film than Black Sabbath was. And I was like, what the heck, man? Like, even like the acting and all that kind of, I was like, you would think for 30 some years later, it would be a little bit more better. I mean, granted, yes, the quality, I'm not talking about obviously the quality of film, especially the film stock, is obviously better in the Black Sabbath's favor because, like I said, it's 31 years later. But
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I'm like, I don't know.
Right.
Like to begin with, I probably would have agreed with you. It's because it's been years, but I would have been like, oh yeah, definitely. Just because, like I said, it's got that 30-year difference, advantage to it. But then watching them both, and just the other day recapping them again, and I'm like, I don't know, man. I'm kind of like I said, I've always liked both films. I've kind of like, I mean, I definitely have a soft spot for White Zombie just because of me being a
Sure.
White Zombie fan and or being a
Same.
huge Bela Lugosi fan and stuff like that. But I always remembered, Black Sabbath, being like a more modern kind of horror film. And then now watching it, I'm like, I don't know, man. I kind of dig White Zombie better than I do Black Sabbath now.
No, that's fair, my friend. Absolutely. Like, so because that's the thing. It's like I'm watching the two movies and I'm like, while I think that the common populace, I feel the average horror fan is going to stay a little bit more into Black Sabbath. as opposed to White Zombie. I do think that White Zombie still holds up. And I as well am a big White Zombie, Rob Zombie guy, and I still love White Zombie. I just remember watching the movie and just wondering to myself, like, would this be a hard movie for people to just stay into and watch? And I know that that's going to be just that's going to vary from like person to person. But I do think that with Black Sabbath being designed as an anthology and having the, the ability of breaking up the overall movie by concentrating on three small stories was something that I couldn't help but feel was like something that was stronger in an overall product. But I do love the acting, and I've always loved the voodoo story when it comes to White Zombie. I think it's really, really cool, really, really solid. Now, that being said, so we're going to put a little bit of a bam, kibosh on the idea of a flawless fatality. That will not be the case this evening. But when it comes to that, because, if all of you Fangs and Infernos remember when we did our original werewolf episode, that was an incredibly just bad decision on my part. I felt so, not so much confident, but I just remembered that movie differently from like 20 something years prior when I watched it, as opposed to when we both watched it and were like, there's nothing that aged well again about this, other than the fact that the people in the cast still do have careers. But I was like, wow, this movie, not so much. Did not go very well. But anyway, when it comes to the actual showdown, when it comes to the idea of Black Sabbath, I mean, I love the fact that you've got Bela Lugosi against Boris Karloff again. That's always kind of the long-standing quote unquote universal feud. But Black Sabbath, I still think it's a cool overall design. I think it's solid. I think it's well told. I definitely understand what you were saying about the acting because there's definitely some acting in this that's just kind of like, holy shit, man. But I overall do like the writing. I think the idea behind the stories are actually quite good and very, very interesting. And I definitely like the idea with just kind of the simplicity of the old school, like ringing phone, which I thought was just a very cool way to start it off.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, with me, it's like, yeah, it's crazy because, like I said, I remember, like, always liked, I've always, like the anthologies and stuff like that were always been good with. But yeah, to me, it was just like one of those ones where, like, when I remember liking this a lot more when I was younger, and then like I said, just recently watching it again now. Even though, like I said, neither one of these movies are longer. Black Sabbath is obviously a little bit longer of a movie. This is your
Yeah,
traditional, more hour and a half ish movie, where White Zombie's more of like an hour and like 10 minutes or something like that. It's very shorter.
yeah,
But for some reason, Black Sabbath to me watching it, other than I like. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like both the first and the third story in the anthology in the trilogy, but to
yeah,
me, I felt like both of them were just kind of dragging along a little bit longer than what it was, and it's like where the middle one is always was my favorite one. I like the vampire, you know what I mean. I think it's kind of funny with Boris, especially Boris Karloff playing a vampire now, so which is his first role as playing a vampire, and like you said, with all the arguing between the Universal monsters and stuff like that with Bella and with Boris. So I thought that was kind of funny, but I always just liked it because it's just like the little kid knocking on the door and the mom trying to come out and stuff like that. I always liked that story, and I mean, I guess precursoring. I think I completely forgot about the ending of the movie, and I was like, oh my God, that's the funniest thing ever. But I love the ending of the movie where, Boris is, doing his little, this is the end of the end of the movie kind of spiel, this is the end of my tale. And he's riding on a horse, and all of a sudden it kind of backs away, and it's kind of like your first entrance into like the fourth dimension, the fourth wall, where
Yeah,
you're
well, they
seeing the
just
movie
pull the
being made.
curtain back.
He's on a fake horse, and people are running around with like trees and make it look like he's moving and stuff like that. And I'm like, that's kind of cool. I mean, it's very like Mel Brooks, he's always doing that
Yes.
where, moves, it comes into a movie, or even like Monty Python, the end of, Holy Grail, all of a sudden it's, the policemen and the ambulance are all coming and arresting everybody. It's very like, you broke, past that barrier. So I completely forgot about that. I was like, oh my God, this is great. I wish, especially at a time like that, in the 60s, that was, I can guarantee that was almost not heard of seeing that kind of behind the scene kind of look to it. But I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, when it comes to the, to both of these movies of that, and I put it on my notes, which was kind of funny. I thought it was funny. But like, with the, this one and, Black Sabbath, obviously, while they, when they, I can't off the top of my head remember the name. They had a band name before Black Sabbath, and
Earth.
they, what's that?
Earth.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I remember them, talking about going to, well, when they were getting ready to record, they went to the movie theater and saw Black Sabbath and was like, "Oh, that's really, really cool." So yeah, obviously everybody knows that, Black Sabbath came up with that, with their name of them from this movie. Obviously everybody knows that, Black Sabbath, was Ozzy before Ozzy became, and, obviously we just lost Ozzy just not that long ago. But, the one thing that I dismiss and more in this one versus White Zombie is that, we for a Black Sabbath movie, I did not see any war pigs. There was no generals gathering in masses in this film, and there definitely, wasn't any, anything like that. I was
There
kind of
was
disappointed. I was
paranoia,
waiting for,
though.
yeah, I mean, a little bit of paranoia, but
A little bit of paranoia.
a little bit of paranoia. But at least with White Zombie, there are, there are zombies. Um, they are white. Some of them were really pale white, and, they were, coming out of the graves, and they were more human than human, and they were astro creeping, and they were doing everything that White Zombie has talked about in their movies, in their songs. So yeah, when I came to it, I was like, you know what, I just didn't see. I was waiting for, some crazy, maybe a crazy train to come around or something like that, or something, Black Sabbathy. I'm like, come on, man, you got to at least put something in your songs that has to do with the movie, and it's apparently they didn't, which was kind of crazy. But I guess it's a different time, White Zombie. Even though I don't think, at least that I can think of. I mean, I would imagine that they do, and I know there's like 9 billion. Um, Sound clips between White Zombie and Rob Zombie. He's always used a lot of old school
Yeah.
Russ Meyer stuff in his films. Obviously, he uses a lot of sound clips from Night of the Living Dead and stuff like that. I'm kind of curious. I don't really remember if there's any clips of any of his songs from the White Zombie movie. I don't know. Like, I would imagine there's got to be at least one in one of his songs. I just can't think of it right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, I remember watching the movie Devil, and it was funny because I was kind of thinking the same thing. Like, I remember watching it and really kind of dialing in like my listening to the movie as I kept trying to catch that clip and be like, there it is. Because I saw White Zombie many, many years ago because when I fell in love with the band, um, I, like everybody else, and then became a horror fan, you started learning things and realizing things. And as soon as I found out about this movie, because I was aware of being a Bella guy, like, like you are, us both being Universal Monster Dracula people, like, I knew of his catalog and I knew of titles, and then some of them I kind of brushed off as I was very fixated very early, of course, with my brethren, and I was very about vampires very quickly, and I got a little bit, with like blinders on when it came to other things in actors' filmography. But then, in the early 90s, when I'm really getting into Rob Zombie, I'm like, man, I love this White Zombie band. And man, these two this solo album that he's coming out with, I really hope it's going to be as good as what I currently love about the band. And then ultimately, leading to his second album, which I still think is genius as well. But then when I learned that it was a reference to White Zombie and he got his name from the actual movie, I was kind of like, oh, wow. Well, yeah, let me go back and investigate more of Bella's catalog. And that's the thing I thought was kind of cool. In fact, I actually kind of like the way we're doing this showdown currently, where we're just talking about the movies on just an even plane and a global scale. But I loved the idea of that. And you're right. There's so much more clear reference material in the movie White Zombie than there ever is in the movie Black Sabbath. But ultimately, I still like the way both of those movies are designed. I've always loved just old school black and white movies. We're both the fans of that. Everybody and their mother knows how much I love Nosferatu specifically when it comes to vampire movies. It's like, it's literally like, Lost Boys and Nosferatu and then everybody else. But don't get me wrong, of course, I have my elite movies where, it's Lost Boys and Nosferatu and Bela Lugosi's Dracula and Bram Stoker's Dracula and, you know, Interview with the Vampire, Queen of the Damned, etc., etc. But anyway, I really love the story that's played with White Zombie because I really love the voodoo aspect of it, which I think is so cool, especially from that idea of like New Orleans and whatnot. I do find that, like, there is the thing is, those anthologies are really tricky because sometimes they just don't get it right, where you could see it's just a money grab or it's just a bad continuation of something. Creepshow 3. But then you also get just really well told intersplice story movies. Trick or Treat, the early Creepshow, Tales from the Dark Side was fantastic. We talked about that recently. And there's just a lot of really cool stuff when it comes to that. And again, like there was definitely a drag factor when it came to Black Sabbath. I did overall enjoy Telephone. I thought that that was overall pretty good. I liked the fact that it did a pretty good job getting to the point. The funny thing is, the third movie with the kind of like the demon possession, Sapphire Ring was very to the point. I mean, that was a very short story by traditional definition, where you had the movie in the middle that I really did love, because of course it's also the vampire reference style of the movie, but like it had such a good story to tell. I really loved the concept of it. But they took such unnecessary time explaining it and getting to where it
Yeah.
needed to go that I was just like, Jesus Christ, guys. Like, really? Like, I like Telephone. I thought they dialed it in. I loved the idea of, like, this former pimp, you know, calling and kind of torturing out his former bitch. And then she calls her mate, and then her mate's like, well, this kind of is like the opportunity that I have to kind of get my lover back. So let me fake it until you make it. And so she calls pretending to be the pimp to get her to come over and be consoled and be protected. And then ultimately the pimp finds them, murders the girl that he thought was the girl he was going after, and then ultimately tries to go in for the kill, but she's protected herself and she just takes him out. But anyway, I do like the idea of, I think that's got a pretty solid trajectory of story to be told, where the middle movie just for vampire's sake just drags it out really long when it's a very simplistic story, where even in the third film, I love the fact that it was pretty much, get in, get off, get out. But even the third movie, I felt could have actually benefited from a little bit better storytelling and a little bit more. We talked recently about a movie that left a lot of questions, as opposed to answers. And I felt the third one kind of did that, where it was like, you know, it was just this really just quick blast. And it was like, you could have told a little bit more. So ultimately, when it comes to Black Sabbath, I feel the biggest issues in that are questionable acting at times. I do think it's really excellent storytelling. I think the script, the screenplay of all those stories, I actually think is very good. But I really think the editing and the idea of how long or how little they feel they need to get the story told is really, really obscure. Versus White Zombie, which I think is a very just well written and well designed story to be told from beginning to end.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the crazy thing about it too. It's like, and it's different. You know what I mean? Where like when you're comparing them, you're comparing this. Obviously Boris Karloff playing different characters, and then you have Bela Lugosi in this character that's basically, for all the PNs out there, oh, yeah,
Oh
Mister
yeah.
Lugosi. But it's like, it's even though he's not playing the role, he's very Dracula. He's got the widow peak hair. He's doing the hand thing constantly, the looking into his eyes. The one thing about both of these movies that they both did, which was kind of interesting, because like I said, being the fact that there's a 30-year gap between these movies, is the hypnotizing and on screen.
Yes.
Where it's like they just basically just shake the camera and make it like very fuzzy, and then it's like I said, 30 years later, even in Black Sabbath and the second movie where he's hypnotizing, it's still that, oh, when I shake the camera to make it seem like they're getting hypnotized. And I'm like, Jesus, man, you think that 30 years later you wouldn't have done the same trick that you're
Right.
doing nowadays. But yeah, it's like, yeah, I mean, for when it comes to it, like I said, yeah, I think it was like, like you said, and when it comes to Black Sabbath, like the first story and the first story, really good. Like I said, I really like the second story. I think it's the better of the story. But like
Yes.
you said, I think it's just, yeah, like you said, it's one of those ones that just, you're like, man, it kind of reminds me, and like I said, not that I don't hate when we talked about Creep Show, but with the Crate one, where that was just in this anthology, you have short, birthday and the other ones, and some of the other ones were really short, and then you have this one that's taken 45 minutes to almost an hour of the movie, and it's like, you're using most of your time for just this one story, and it's like, okay, now it's starting to drag on a little bit. And that's kind of like what that reminded me a little bit of, that with
Yes.
Black Sabbath, with
100%.
that middle one. But then, yeah, the third one, yeah, I thought it was interesting. It's like, is the ring possessed? I'm assuming, because like, the girl comes over, takes the ring, then gets haunted, and that thing kills. She chokes herself and she dies, and the person finds her, and they're like, oh, looks like there might have been a ring on her finger, and all of a sudden, like the handmaiden girl is like, oh, and she starts seeing it, so she's probably gonna start getting the curse and stuff like that. But I thought, like, out of all of them, that third one had the scariest and creepiest vibe to it, because that
Yes.
freaking like demon possessed chick or whatever, or doll
Oh,
or whatever they used,
really
I don't know
good.
what, mannequin or whatever the hell that was really creepy, man. It's like, constantly going into the camera. And I thought that was kind of cool too. And even with Black Sabbath too, is I think when in these movies and stuff like that, when they're going to the camera, I'm like, are they on like treadmills or something like that? Because they're like going into the camera, and they're like these people on skates or something the whole entire time. Like, it's kind of cool, but it's neat, especially like I said, it's weird when watching both these movies, because like I said, them having such a huge age gap in it. Like I said, you would think, and like I said, obviously the technology and stuff like that's a little bit better with Black Sabbath and stuff like that. But I just like, when it came to the White Zombie, with him, obviously, it's the traditional zombie, voodoo curse. He does this, and it's your first. I guess foursome in a movie, I guess, because everybody's in love with this one girl, which, to me, I don't I mean, I'm not saying she's bad looking, but I don't think she was all super that great. So I'm like, all these guys going after her. I thought out of all the I thought of all the girls that were in the movies, this movie and Black Sabbath, the one that was the Boris Karloff's daughter was, the one that looked more like a vampire. She was so pale white.
Yes.
She was whiter. She was whiter than the vampires were in this movie. I'm like, Jesus freaking Christ. But yeah, like yeah, the whole entire time, like I said, they're all going, she's, in the White Zombie, she's gonna get married. The guy loves her. Then the guy who's hosting the wedding's in love with her. Bela Lugosi's character's in love with her. It's like everybody wants a little bit of her and stuff like that. And I just think it's pretty cool. I think it's it's interesting, and it's pretty crazy. I mean, it's definitely a different things at the times. You know what I mean? Especially because it being like a more traditional, like before, George Romero's zombies, the more like traditional Haiti zombie and stuff like that, kind of like voodoo kind of curse kind of thing, but they're dead, but then, they can still get shot, or he can still control them and things like that. But, I think it was kind of interesting, especially even at the time, I read that, they did have a lot of African American actors in the movie, but then there were some like I'm assuming the guy that was kind of teaching them about stuff towards the end of the movie was a white guy in blackface. So people were going to be watching this movie and see like, oh yeah, probably not the greatest things at times, but like in the 30s, I'm not saying
Right.
it's right or it's wrong, but you didn't have as many African Americans that were on sets or allowed on sets and stuff like that. So it's like you go into that, but it's like yeah, it's pretty interesting. You know what I mean? I thought it was kind of even with Bela Lugosi. I mean, I think that he was meant to be a little bit darker, like maybe not blackface, maybe more like brown face or something like that, because he was very, especially like when you saw him like normally, like it wasn't that bad, but when they showed the close up of his eyes and his face, his skin was very dark, brownish, kind of
Yeah.
weird. It was really weird in the makeup, but it was kind of like. Oh, is he a deaf person? Because obviously, when you see him from far away, he's the pale skin Bela Lugosi. But then, like I said, when he's up close, it's like like I said, he's portraying somebody that would come from Haiti or something like that. So I was just like,
Yeah.
I don't know, but I thought it was cool though. It's kind of it's kind of a with White Zombie, it's sort of a little bit of a precursor. Obviously, probably a reason why I mean, when we did our zombie movies before, we did Fido, where they're teaching these zombies to work for him, and I mean that's sort of what he's doing in this one. He's got them working in the cane fields and doing all of his labor for his factory. You just get some Haiti zombies to do your work for you.
Absolutely. No, 100%. And I really do think that, it was a very strong, well-written movie. And Bella's acting chops, I mean, it's well documented. Like, he's excellent at what he did. Like, obviously there was, you know, we lost Bella a long time ago, and we never were going to get him up to now. But man, wouldn't it have been cool to just get like Bella, kind of like with Vincent Price, where we lost him in the early 90s, but we still got a really huge chunk of acting for Vincent Price, where we really didn't get that for Bela Lugosi. Frankly, we didn't get that. We didn't get that for Boris Karloff either. Um, but I've always just loved Bella's ability to get into these characters, especially foreign characters, being a foreigner himself. I find it really, really interesting. And like you said, there's stuff about this movie you're going to be able to nitpick where you're like, oh my God, that's horrible, that's racist, that's terrible, that's this, that's it's like, stop. It's 1930. We're not condoning it. We're not saying it's right. We're not saying that they shouldn't have made the effort to get if not an actual Haitian actor, somebody of at least proper, ethnic background to play these characters. We understand that. We really, really do. It's been honestly well documented in old Disney cartoons, regardless of what Walt Disney's, beliefs were, which again, that's well documented too. We don't need to get into that. But it was a sign of the times. It was a way of doing things. There's so many different, minority groups that have, little smudges to the of movies here and there where things not necessarily done quite correctly. But anyway, that being said, overall, I mean, White Zombie, it's a really, really cool movie. It's really well acted. I love the idea also of tackling something like Haitian style voodoo, which is a well documented, real traditional thing, of people think a lot of voodoo and they think of New Orleans right off the bat, which is totally justifiable. But you also need to understand that's also one of the things that I loved about when you and I were talking about Hatchet a few episodes back. Tony Todd's portrayal of that voodoo character, is the idea of like that goes so back into foreign countries like Haiti and stuff like that. People are very, very familiar. They're either learning about this from me now or they have learned about this from me just getting to know me. Is that me being from Massachusetts, being from Salem, is that my great grandfather, times eight, I believe it was the last guy hung in the Salem witch trials. Now, the only reason why I bring that up is simply due to the fact that the Salem witch trials really started due to the fact that a, foreign, Native American, nanny, housekeeper, slave was telling stories of her homeland. And those stories are actually what birthed the Salem witch trials. So anyway, getting back on point, that's the thing I actually really love about this movie. And I love the fact that White Zombie tackles it that way. White Zombie tackles it that way for the sake of telling a proper Haitian voodoo style and understanding that curses can be broken. People can still have a happy ending and they can still be back with their loved ones. Just kind of have to go through the trials, tribulations, and the proper channels to do it. And that was the thing I really loved about the overall story trajectory that White Zombie did, because I think they did it very well. Overall, I do think due to the anthology, the ability that anthologies have to keep your attention because of the breakup, I do think that Black Sabbath has a potential entertainment factor that's a little stronger to horror fans nowadays. But again, when you also don't properly kind of slice and splice the editing of movies for the story you're telling, that can be detrimental in its own right. You and I have done two franchise episodes, and I still to this day will die on the hill that Witchboard is an absolutely fantastic franchise, but that third movie is so detrimental to the success of the franchise due to bad storytelling, bad writing, just bad acting, bad everything. Very similar to Warlock, which, was another Devil victory, and it's all good because Warlock, we love Julian Sands. First movie's amazing. Second movie, very solid. Again, that third is just a very big drop off. Now, anyway, while I do love the fact of that the second movie is so strong and is easily the best story in the trilogy, it's the idea of it's very long and drawn out and it's very hard to stay on top of it. I think Telephone was pretty much right where it needed to be. I overall love it as the opener. I think it's a solid story at a proper timing. But then, just like you said, the third movie leaves more questions to be answered, where it's like, man, why couldn't you have chopped a few things in the second story that were truly unnecessary to allow, if you were trying to stick to a certain time frame, to allow this second story to like, dot those I's and cross those T's and kind of allow the people watching to understand fully what's being told.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's to the point where it's like that. And like I said, when it comes to these, when it comes to these movies and stuff like that, it's definitely especially because both are with modern horror fans and stuff like that. I mean, unless you're asking old school guys, I mean, you're talking about, yeah, like I said, Black Sabbath being in the '60s, so you're looking at people who are you know, you know, in their 70s or so when these movies came out or stuff like that, and then people who were in the in the time for White Zombie in the 30s and stuff like that. Most of those people who were around when that movie came around are either 1 foot in the grave or already in the grave. You know what I mean? From it being almost 100 years. You know what I mean? From that film. So it's one of those ones where it's like, yeah, when we're talking about it and even getting down to, to the nitty gritty when we start doing the tale of the tape and stuff like that to see, who we want to fight against and who we're going to win. Ultimately, like I said, I mean, I think, film people are probably, maybe, or like you said, newer people might want to watch Black Sabbath over White Zombie just because of the fact that it's a you know somewhat newer of a modern time movie versus that. But I mean, I think ultimately, like I said, overall, I think movie wise, if you go by like which one's the better movie, I do believe that I think Black Sabbath maybe has that little bit of that extra because it has the three stories and stuff like that, where White Zombie is kind of just that more linear kind of get in, get out, and get done kind of thing. But I think though that like in the longevity of the years and stuff like that, and even just in plain just asking people, I can guarantee you that more people probably know White Zombie the movie more than Black Sabbath the movie. I think
Yeah.
most people, if you ask them like Black Sabbath, they're probably gonna think of Black Sabbath the band. You know what I mean? Now granted, metalheads and rockers, if you ask them White Zombie, they're probably going to think of White Zombie. They're going to think of Rob Zombie and stuff like that too
Yeah.
at some point. But I think if you ask them like movie wise, you're like, hey man, what movie do you like better, White Zombie or Black Sabbath, or which one have you watched? I think maybe more people probably. I think I think in general, if you ask, especially if you ask anybody who's probably 30 or younger, they probably never watched either one of them. But more
Totally.
than likely, maybe someone in, some maybe their father or their uncle or somebody that might have talked about it. But I think in the longevity of these movies, I think that White Zombie has that little bit of that slighter edge just because one, not getting it, not giving, not saying anything bad against Boris Karloff, that's a huge Karloff fan, but obviously the Bela Lugosi I think is like when it comes to those old school horror film actors, Bela Lugosi is one of those top names that even if you haven't seen any of the Bela Lugosi movies, you know that name, okay, I know that name for something versus like that. I think like I said with White Zombie, it's kind of like to that point where it's like it's definitely the more popular, more well known. If you hadn't seen it, you at least know of it or you know about it. It's like you said, it's one of the first movies to kind of deal with the zombie kind of, aspect and stuff like that. And then, obviously, them taking the, George Romero and stuff like that, kind of taking that kind of into the zombie realm, which I guess now, if people are probably watching it, they're like, wait, none of these guys are getting up out of graves and eating brains. And what kind of zombies are these? Thinking that they're, what the typical people think of a zombie movie versus, like, tell them,
Totally.
oh, it's a zombie movie. Oh, cool. Wait, it's a movie from the 30s and it's a zombie film? What? Oh, yeah, cool. And then, like, like, they're going around, just kind of walking. And they're like, well, they're done. I mean, they are kind of zombies. They're typically sort of dead, but they're not dead. So, it is with that. But I think when it comes to those, I think it's like that. And like, yeah, like I said, I think more people probably maybe might, like I said, digress to the Bela Lugosi character and stuff like that, where he's such a good character. Even like I said, even just with the mask and stuff like that that he showed, but like people kind of would remember somewhat. Where like Boris Karloff, people aren't gonna really remember
Yeah,
him in this movie as much as his previous films and stuff like that. So it's one of those ones where it's like you said, you could go probably back and forth on like
yeah,
on them and stuff like that. Like I said, I think Black Sabbath, I think overall is a better film and stuff like that in its entirety. But
yeah.
I think that White Zombie holds stronger and resonates more with the horror community than Black Sabbath does.
For sure. No, definitely, Devil. I definitely understand with all of those points for sure. So moving into the obituaries, this is kind of like where my head's at when it comes to this. So like I like the movies even up. I like them each at about a seven.
Yeah.
So, and again, here's the thing. Um, I could swing the needle as a victory to myself for Black Sabbath, solely understanding exactly what you said, where I do think the movie for Black Sabbath is overall stronger just as a product and just the ability for Fangs and Infernos to stay entertained due to the anthology aspect, where ultimately I can also where I could make it a 7.5 to a 7.0 and a victory for Black Sabbath. Now, that being said, I can also honestly make an argument for a victory for you at a 7.5 to a 7.0 for White Zombie due to the name recognition, the strength in cast with Bela Lugosi specifically, his portrayal of his character, and the strength in acting and the overall strength in continuous story. Where Boris in, where Boris in Black Sabbath, no disrespect to Boris Karloff, because this is not meant to be that way, but is a forgettable character in that movie because he's broken up in these anthologies. While I absolutely love, like we talked about at the top, that pull back behind the curtain with the riding the horse and then seeing how they did movie magic back then. I absolutely love that. I mean, some people might think it's stupid. I thought it was genius. I was like, that is absolutely awesome. So we really could go back and forth all night on how we like this because there's very strong back and forth. Do I think the average horror fan would stay more entertained during Black Sabbath? Honestly, yes, I do. Again, it's the anthology strength behind it. Do I think that traditional horror fans would really just love the story, the authenticity, and the portrayal with Bella's character and and everything in White Zombie? 100%. So ultimately, I give them both sevens. I could swing them both in both ways. Do we want to leave this up to the Fangs and Infernos and just let them decide it for us? Or how do you look at it?
Yeah, I was gonna go that route. I figured like 7.0 is a good score for these films because like I said, I mean, yeah, they're not the greatest films in the entire world, but without these films, you wouldn't have modern horror right now.
Yeah,
Without
that's why
fellow
they
like
can't be fives and shit.
yeah, yeah, and without, I mean, not even just that, without these movies, you would have had dark Sabbats, and maybe you would have had a brown oogly boogly monster instead of white zombie or something like that. What their names might have been completely different and not what it is. So it's like like I said, yeah, I think both films are that in that same level. And like I said, there's definitely arguments to, like you said, there's definitely arguments that we can make that maybe one, Black Sabbath could win, or on one point, White Zombie could win. But yeah, I'm definitely on when we started doing this new thing with the fans, I feel like this is one of those ones where I'm kind of curious, but I think ultimately, I think the fans should decide on this one. I think this one's
Sure.
more of a fan one because it's definitely one of those ones where I feel like both of us kind of like agree with both films kind of being equal, like I said. But then obviously with these kind of things, you kind of have to have a winner and a loser once in a while. So I feel like it's one of those ones where it's like it's definitely more of opinion. Like I said, it could be your younger horror fans, but then like I said, they might go with Black Sabbath, but then again, they might just go with White Zombie just for that. And it's kind of curious too whether, and I mean, if I mean, like I said, if you're going musical world, I mean, to me, you know. I'm a bigger White Zombie fan than I am a Black Sabbath fan,
Me too.
but I would say, but if I had to choose band wise, I would probably give it to Black Sabbath just because if you don't have Black Sabbath, you don't have bands like White Zombie. If you had, because they were that kind of like that different vibe of what was coming out in the 60s and the early 70s in the UK and stuff like that. So they were, they're that, considered the modern, metal, heavy metal band and stuff like that. So without those kind of people, you wouldn't have, you wouldn't have the music that, like I said, the White Zombies and stuff like that. Even though, like I said, me personally, I would definitely go White. I'm a bigger White Zombie fan than I am Black Sabbath fan. But like I said, it's one of those ones where it's like, I don't necessarily always like some of these bands, but I can always give them the credits. Like I've said millions of times, I'm not a huge Led Zeppelin fan. I've never been. I'll never say that I was, but I don't deny their contribution to the music and their influences and stuff like that with that. Even the Beatles, I mean, I like a lot of Beatles songs. I like a lot more Beatles songs than I would probably guess, but I would never say that I'm a huge Beatles fan. I like a lot of Beatles songs. I like about it, but I'm not like gung ho like, oh yeah, Beatles are the best band ever. But like I said, but they're one of those bands that you have to recognize them and give them the props for what it is. So it's like with that with the band wise of Black Sabbath versus White Zombie, I would definitely give the edge to Black Sabbath just because of their them kind of paving the way and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm completely. I think it should be. I think it'd be fun to do it. I may even do a double poll and
Whoa.
just do the movie White Zombie versus Black Sabbath and see what people like, and then do the band wise and see what people think that wise. I mean, I kind of feel like more people are probably going to pick Black Sabbath over that, mainly because, like I said, for reasons that I said, because of them being kind of like the inventors. But then obviously we just lost Ozzy not that long ago, so he
Who
might just get
knows?
those sympathy votes too. But I don't know. It'd be kind of interesting to see who.
I feel like that's probably what Mrs. Vamp is gonna go towards. She's gonna hit the Babes is gonna hit those Aussie nostalgia feels, I feel.
Yeah, yeah. Which is under, like I said, it's understandable. Like I said, me personally, I've always been more of a solo Ozzy fan than the Black Sabbath. I mean, not that I
Me
don't like
too.
Black Sabbath. I've seen Black Sabbath a bunch of times. I saw them on Ozfest. I've always liked their music and I've always listened to them, but I always more was more into Ozzy when he started doing his solo, Blizzard of Oz and all that kind of Bark at the Moon and stuff like that was like that was my Ozzy. So
Yeah.
for me that, and it's the same thing with like Rob Zombie. I'm a huge Rob Zombie fan, but me personally, I like the White Zombie stuff better than I like the Rob Zombie stuff. Now,
Mhm.
except for the new Rob Zombie album. The new Rob Zombie album kind of reminds me of the old school and the first solo Rob Zombie album because it still had
Dude,
that kind of
the
it
Great
still had
Satan
that
is really good, man.
yeah, it still has that dirty gritty. So I mean to me, but like I said, if I had to choose between Rob Zombie solo or White Zombie, I'll pick White Zombie. But if I had to choose Black Sabbath over Ozzy, I'm going the other way. I'm going solo Ozzy. So
100% Devil for sure, man. No, I'm definitely with you on that. So shout out to the Great Satan from Rob Zombie. That album is really sick. It's really good. And I honestly I gotta chalk it up to the fact that Riggs and Blasco are back in the band. And again, being that they've only been back in the band for so long, who knows how much dominant Rob has on this album versus the influence of Riggs and Blasco. But knowing Rob, he's always been very open, in my opinion, to like the writing and the riffage and the style of the other members of his band. So I think that one of the things that makes the Great Satan so great is the fact that Riggs and Blasco are back in the band. And Riggs has actually been back in the band now longer than Blasco. But I think it's
Yeah.
really cool when it comes to that. But no, absolutely, Devil, because I'm definitely with you on that. So like obviously with the fact that we don't have Ozzy with us anymore, but if I was like to take us back 5 years or 10 years, like if Black Sabbath and White Zombie were both doing reunion shows on the same day, both in Baltimore, I'm at White Zombie.
Yeah.
100%, no questions asked. Just like you said, I'm an Ozzy Osbourne fan before I'm a Black Sabbath fan. So much amazing music came out of Black Sabbath that I love to death. And that's also a shout out to Dio and his credit as well. But like, and I love Children of the Grave. It's easily still my favorite Black Sabbath song to this day.
Yeah.
And there's just so much great stuff. But everything that Ozzy was churning out with Randy and then with Jakey Lee, because again, in my opinion, Ultimate Sin is the quintessential album when it comes to Ozzy Osbourne. And that does take a little bit of into consideration that we didn't get a continuation of Ozzy with Randy Rhoads, which is just an unfortunate situation that we just have to accept that we only got 2 albums with Randy when we could now have like what 15 albums with Ozzy and Randy,
Yeah.
but then we wouldn't have Zach Wild. So anyway, different
Yeah.
things could happen at different times. That's we'll save that for another episode. But no, I am a White Zombie guy over Black Sabbath. I am a Ozzy fan though over Black Sabbath. I love White Zombie and I love Rob. Um, so that's the way it's going to be. So Fangs and Infernos, that is where we shall leave it. It is an even 7.0 when it comes to White Zombie versus Black Sabbath. So make sure that you guys are keeping your eye out to all of the socials when it comes to the Vampire and Devil podcast for when Devil drops that poll for you guys to vote on how you think that we need to swing the needle. Does White Zombie take it because of Bela Lugosi's experience, his execution as a character, and the well-written story? Or does Black Sabbath take it for, the collection of really well-done stories and excellent writing? Regardless of maybe some questionable acting and maybe some questionable editing, the idea of just an overall anthology driven movie at a later time, does that have your votes? Does that get your juices flowing? So keep an eye out for that. So it's going to be you guys deciding who gets the victory on this one, as at a even 7.0, White Zombie and Black Sabbath have met in the middle. And keep an eye out for if Devil does want to drop that musical vibe on you guys for which band you guys prefer. So that's the way it's going to be. Keep an eye open for that. Of course, as always, we want to give a shout out to our friends Mark and Lizzie, who do handle the Vampire and Devil podcast merch booth at the rockandhorror.com website. Please make sure you guys check out the Vampire and Devil collab category for everything that Devil and I have for merch when it comes to this show. And of course, take a look at rockandhorror.com in general. Mark and Lizzie have so much amazing stuff on there. It's really, really awesome, and they're some of the greatest people we know. We love our buddy John Kozik, who owns the Salem Witchboard Museum and the Witchboard Museum of Baltimore. Please make sure that you're checking out these museums, keeping them rocking and rolling. They're such an amazing experience, so much fun, and John is incredibly knowledgeable. If you want to, keep everything going, as far as nice flavor profiles, then Brutalities is your way to do it. Amazing collab that Devil was subsequently featured on with a collab between Brutalities and Cold Chamber, which was very, very cool. And we loved the opportunity to be followed and a little bit of a, collaboration when it came to Brutalities and Cold Chamber. We felt very, very honored when it came to that. But amazing flavors, so much to choose from, but definitely make sure you guys are checking out Brutalities. When it comes to home decor, you know that Devil and I love it creepy in our abodes. Check out Twisted Vines. Chris and Saren do amazing work. So much cool horror decor. Really, really cool stuff to check out. So make sure you guys are checking out everything that they've got going on. And of course, check out our buddy Chris, who owns the Buffalo Bill House in Perryopolis, Pennsylvania, an amazing Airbnb. Make sure you book. It's a great experience. And also make sure you guys are booking out there soon because it's not too far. It's about an hour, but it's a very easy drive to get out there to the Monroeville Mall. Unfortunately, if you haven't heard, we are going to be losing that very, very soon. Really, really hoping that somebody is able to swoop in to protect this. But unfortunately, the Monroeville Mall, which is where Dawn of the Dead was filmed at, is going to be leaving us. So make sure you guys are going out and staying at the Airbnb of the Buffalo Bill House because you'll be able to drive right out there and check it out, support it, and just have great experiences. But even when we do lose that mall, staying at the Buffalo Bill House still allows you to go out to the cemetery from Night of the Living Dead, which is an amazing experience all in its own right. But again, that's the way it's going to be, and forever that is how it shall stand until you guys tell us how it changes. At a 7.0, again, we are even, so watch out for the Devil's Poll and let us know who gets the victory. Horns up, fangs out.
What's up? It's the devil here, and we're here to talk more about those 2000 horror comedies. And now we're gonna talk about 2004's Club Dread. What are you talking about, meow? Oh, wrong movie, but gotta love the guys from Super Troopers in this movie. Ooh, Club Dread. It's got a lot of crazy stuff. It's got some killers. It's got some thrillers. It's got some comedy. It's got action. It's got it all. It even got a little bit of craziness, and you never know who's done it. Why not be on an island with some beautiful ladies and some horrible dreadlocks and accents? But the Club Dread guys love it. Oh, yeah. And we know Brandy loves it. Anyway, go check out Club Dread because the devil said so.
Fangs and Infernos, we've got a fun one for you. Not only is every episode fun, because your beloved vampire and your ever so beloved devil like it that way, but this is genuinely a fun one because of the way that it ties in. But as you guys know, we love our rock and roll, we love our metal. Devil and I, as of this recording, are very close to cruising our way back to Columbia, Maryland to enjoy the M3 Festival, which was part of the inspiration for this episode. So, Devil, what do you say, my friend? Let's talk a little bit again about musicians in movies. And this was a really, really cool one. We've got He Never Died, featuring Henry Rollins. We all love him. Liar. No lies. We love Henry Rollins. And we're going to put it up against Suck, which features Alice Cooper. Henry is actually in this movie as well, but the main players are Dimitri Coates, who plays Queenie, Alice Cooper, who kind of plays the head vampire. There's so many just awesome cameos that are just kind of spliced in through here. You know, Extreme slash V&D alumnus Calico Cooper was also in this movie. So, like, a very, very cool showdown that we've got on this one. But yes, my friend, musicians in horror movies.
Yeah, we got a little, like you said, with the Henry Rollins, cause I'm a liar. I'll eat your heart out. I'll get justice. I just,
I'm a liar.
I just remember watching, when that video came out in the Beavis and Butthead episodes, man. They're like,
Yes.
that dude's really mad. This is like, okay, that's crazy. Yeah, it's like, so it's like, it's funny. Like I said, I don't even, like, it's one of those ones like before where we've done it where we, both episodes maybe had Bill Moseley in it, or we had another one that had like two, the one that we did before with the redneck horror had Robert Englund in both movies, and it's like,
Oh,
not intent, it's kind of funny that we could intentionally sometimes do them where we're like, okay, let's just do this because they both
yep.
have it, but this
Bill
one was
Moseley
one
was
of
the better sequels.
yeah, yeah. So it was like one of the ones where it's like, well, maybe, like this was unintentional. Like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, Henry Rollins is in it. Because, like I said, obviously Henry Rollins, and He Never Died is the main character.
Yeah.
He's kind of in Suck, he's kind of just a secondary character. So you kind of
Yeah.
forget that, oh yeah, that's right, he is in both these movies. So it's gonna be interesting. But yeah, it's, what I mean. There's a lot of movies out there that definitely have musicians, and we've done ours before in the past, and like I said, it's always fun to see them, just like when it comes to wrestlers who've gone into movies, or other entertainment people. It's fun sometimes to see some of these ones. You have some of these, musicians who have crossed over to, be going to movies and stuff like that that are really good, and then you have some that are really, really bad. And to me, I've always been a fan of Henry Rollins and his acting
Me
career. I
too.
always thought he was a really, really good actor. That's like another one we're going to talk about, with the recording of this, and we were just talking about M3. Buck Cherry's going to be there, and I've all
Josh
I,
Todd.
I was always, not a huge Buck Cherry fan. I liked some of their songs, the rock and roll, the edgy, but I always thought he was a really cool actor. I always liked him in his movies, even though he played like smaller roles. I always just thought he played a really cool guy. So, which, like I said, so one of those ones where sometimes where the musicians come out and sometimes like you're like, okay, yeah, you shouldn't stick to it, and sometimes, you get good ones, I mean, you look at Ice Cube, Ice
Yeah.
T and some of those guys and stuff like that, you go into it, and then you get some other ones, you're like, okay, yeah, stick to stick to being a musician and maybe and not do it, but like I said, this one's kind of funny, and like you said, Suck's got a little bit of a family cameo one. I'm kind of laughing about it now because I forgot that Calico was in it. I'm kind of surprised that she didn't say Suck was her favorite Alice Cooper movie, just because she got to work with her dad in it. So instead of some of the other ones. But yeah, it's gonna be this. It's gonna be fun. It's fun talking about both these movies. They're definitely you know out there. He Never Died. The main Henry Rollins ones is more of a serious kind of film and stuff like that. Where
Yeah.
Suck is definitely very very campy,
Yeah.
definitely very odd. Definitely, I don't quite understand the. We'll talk about it when we get more into it, but I don't quite understand the allure of why people like this band. I thought that movie was called Suck because the band sucked.
Right.
As the movie goes on, and the music does get a little better, but the campiness of
Mhm.
the music to begin with, I'm like, who in the
Yeah.
right mind is listening to this shit? But anyway, but yeah, it should be a
No,
fun
and
one watching it.
And oh, absolutely. And it's funny, Devil, because with you bringing up Josh Todd, because again, I'm totally right there with you. I mean, I've never been a huge Buck Cherry fan, but I do like their music. I
Yeah,
can't knock their ability to make great music. I mean, Lit Up off their first song is absolute. I mean, their first album is awesome. It's still one of my favorite songs and probably my favorite Buck Cherry song. Riding off their Forgotten album, as I like to call it, their Time Bomb album. I still think that song is fucking bitchin'. And then, of course, everybody knows that 15 was kind of their almost kind of like their big comebacks album because everybody loved it because of Crazy Bitch and Sorry and all that kind of stuff. But the
yeah,
only reason why I bring that up is I couldn't help but start chuckling to myself when you brought that up because I love this movie so much that I instantly thought of it. One of my favorite comedy movies of all time is a movie called The New Guy that both Josh Todd and Henry Rollins are in. So it's kind of that little segment had my brain chuckling for the fact that this is almost like a 7 degrees of like Henry Rollins kind of thing with these other little just references that we're making. So couldn't help but get a little bit of a chuckle out of that. But anyway, my friend, when it comes to He Never Died, it's a very cool movie. I like this movie pretty solidly, but it was very cool to watch this movie because I love Henry Rollins regardless. Growing up with the Misfits, his tie into the Misfits is one of the reasons why, like his friendship with the members of the Misfits is what actually ultimately led me to realize Black Flag. Because I'm more of a Henry Rollins Black Flag guy. I'm well aware, of course, now of all of their early music that Des Cadena, when he was the singer and stuff, did. Which is funny because he played in the Misfits for quite a while when it was Jerry Only's Misfits. And Des was always great. But anyway, I was much more of a Henry Rollins era, you know, Black Flag guy. I realized about Henry and Black Flag because of my affinity and my love of the Misfits. I liked the Henry Rollins band quite a bit. I wasn't a super fan, but the music was solid. The songs were fun. Again, Liar is just hilarious. I mean, it's so good.
yeah,
but I love his stand up. And the thing about it that I found very interesting, especially when it came to this movie, because I got very curious about it right away. And I remember when it got released, I bought the DVD like right away. Um, is that Henry is an incredibly animated guy. Anybody who's familiar or has seen him live, he's on an epic level of animation. And considering I knew already that this movie was more of a serious role, I was actually a little kind of concerned for whether or not I would even like this movie. And that's not a knock on Henry. It's simply because I'm going based off my imperial knowledge of how I'm used to him behaving versus a potential serious role movie. But ultimately, I really can't knock this movie. I think it's solid enough. It didn't float my boat heavily. I actually like this movie quite a bit, but I'm not as turned on by this movie that I was hoping to be. I think the concept is very cool. I love the idea of this very quiet, cannibalistic, kind of semi-vampire character, that just lives a very quiet life, realizes a daughter's involved, kind of like, you know, living this, I don't like change kind of lifestyle. But I actually found that the way that Henry carried himself as a serious actor, I thought was actually very strong in this movie. And when it popped off, it got good. I mean, you've got fucking hearts getting ripped out. You've got really, really solid, bloodlust for any Fangs and Infernos that love that like that. But overall, I did like the concept. I really liked the way that this movie was written. It just didn't quite solidly pop for me the way I was kind of hoping that it would. But overall, I thought this was a very, very cool dynamic. And Henry's ability to go from this animated crazy man to a very droll, kind of solid, quiet character with like the landlady kind of knocking on the door for rent and him just being like, give me a second and opening up a crate filled with millions of dollars to just be like, okay, there's my rent. No, I don't want to keep talking. Door closed. I just thought, and it was comedy, but it worked for the character.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, I always thought it was just a cool, this movie had a cool concept to it because like you really don't know exactly what's going on. You kind of figure it out. Then like as it's going on and stuff like that, and you figure out more that he was basically. Yeah, I like it because it's very, it's a biblical movie. It's has a lot of biblical ties. Where obviously like Henry Rollins is playing what would essentially be the Cain role.
Yes.
Cain and Abel and stuff like that, where he's basically just doomed to keep living, keep living, and obviously, he never dies, and that's why the movie was called that. But I always thought it was kind of cool where it's just like, yeah, where with stories and stuff like that, where even in this, where I mean, a lot of it, a lot of the backstory is like real true things and stuff like that. A lot of pieces of history, and they're talking about like names and stuff like that. And he was talking about obviously like you know putting heads and spikes and people on spikes and stuff like that. Obviously, referencing Vlad the Impaler and stuff
Yeah.
like that, where it's like, Cain, was cursed and basically kind of sort of became the first vampire, as it is, or whatever, whatever you want to say with that. But yeah, I always thought it was, like in the beginning, where he's going the whole entire time. He's like, yeah, I don't eat meat or whatever like that. But then, once the evil inside of him starts going and he starts getting all these people start pissing him off and start doing stupid stuff, he just starts eating people and eating hearts and shit like that. It gets kind of gruely, but I just love the fact that he's just like, again, like one of those where it's weird because like you said, he's very subtle throughout the whole move from a good portion of the movie, but then when you piss him off or when bad shit happens, man, he just goes, Henry Rollins style, smashing shit up and breaking shit up. So yeah, like you said, like I said to me, it's one of those one of these movies where it's like I really, really like it, and it's a fun movie, and it's a cool movie, and it's one that I've gone and watched a bunch of times. You know what I mean? Every so often, but yeah, it's weird because I have like a love hate for it. It's like, you know what I mean? Like I said, I liked it. I think it's cool. I think it's a great movie. I love the, I love the visuals of it. I love, the whole entire storyline and stuff like that. But then it kind of leaves you wanting a little bit more too as much,
It
where it
does.
doesn't satisfy as much as you would like to, I mean, with the storyline and stuff like that. Because there are parts where it kind of goes slow, kind of has a little bit of a slow burn, but then
Mhm.
there's parts where they kind of look like they kind of sped things up and didn't talk as much, where it should have
Yeah.
been a little bit more information. So it's like one of those ones where it's like, I would have liked to, if, obviously because they haven't yet, but I would have liked to have maybe them done like a, when we talk about stuff like that with prequels or a sequel or
Yeah.
something like that. I'm like, I would probably like to continue that story a little bit more, just because I feel like there's, obviously, like you said, I mean, there's little glimpses of it. You was talking about, there's a picture of them in battle and World War I or whatever like that, and all that
The
kind of
scars on his back.
scars and stuff like that. So it'd be just kind of cool to kind of like go into like maybe even like the whole like how he got turned once the Cain and Abel thing, once he killed his brother, like how did he get turned and stuff like that. I mean, I just think there could have it could have added a little bit more, but I still
Yeah.
think it was really I think it was a fun, it's a fun movie. Yeah, I love the the teenage angst girl, the daughter that just was like, yeah. And he's like, why have you been around? It's because, it's just love how much like he doesn't really give a shit that he has a daughter. He's just like, whatever, you're gonna die. I've had 9 probably billion kids in that lifetime
Right.
he's been around. So it's like, well,
He's
yeah, and that's what you kind of think. You're like, man, this guy's kind of an asshole because he doesn't give a
Mhm.
fuck about his ex-wife and he doesn't give a shit about his kid. But then, like I said, if you've been living around since the beginning of time for thousands and thousands of years and have seen thousands and thousands of your wives or kids and all that die, you kind of just be like, whatever. You're just another, bones and flesh that's gonna rot away anyway. So it's like, why even care? I'm stuck here. I'm stuck here forever. So, you know what I mean. But but I like I said, there's some really cool stuff. I really love
yes.
like, when he gets shot in the head and stuff like that, and he's taking out the bullet, and they're like, well, I gotta take it out now because if it heals, it gives me migraines.
Yes. I love that. He's still like bleeding from the bullet wound as he's dragging a body with his daughter down the hall, and the landlady opens her door, and he's just kind of like, this is going to be a reference to the other movie, but it will make sense. But it really reminds me of that for the sake of the showdown. It's this, it's not what it looks like moment
Yeah.
where it's like, oh no, he's fine. Like, I'm helping him to his car kind of a thing. Where it's like, oh yeah, don't worry about it, Mrs. Smith or whatever. Just go back to your soap operas. Don't worry about what we're doing right now with this human and my face being bloody. It's
Yeah.
just stuff like that. And yeah, and it's like it's one of those things like it's a good movie. It's well done. It's acted very well. But yeah, I don't think it ages very well, unfortunately. Where I do think that if you watch, I think it's a great movie as a one-off. And I do think that you can continually enjoy this movie as long as you kind of watch it with significant breaks in between. I'm not talking about like years. Like, if you watch it when you're 25, then you can't watch it again till you're 30 and then 35. No, nothing like that. But I do think it works best if you've got significant breaks between watching of this movie where you just enjoy it for what it is, you enjoy Henry's performance, and you enjoy some of the absurdity. Just like you said, the biggest issue that I have with this movie, just like you were talking about, is that it does leave a lot more questions than answers. Unfortunately, it doesn't do a very good job dotting the I's and crossing the T's, and that's kind of one of the biggest issues I have kind of with this movie. But it still is an enjoyable time. And again, I got to give a lot of credit, a lot of kudos to Henry for his portrayal of this character wearing, meaning that a guy that traditionally is a very kind of animated, very kind of cartoonish performer was really properly able to dial in a real serious role. And I do want to point out to the Fangs and Infernos that aren't familiar and maybe just don't really know, this wasn't a one-off kind of like, you know, what did they call that? What's that phrase when like you get like, when you get lucky like once or whatever. I forget offhand. I'm sure it'll occur to me. But like this wasn't just like a one-off lucky performance. For any Fangs and Infernos that aren't familiar with, he was in Sons of Anarchy playing a white supremacist and really did a phenomenal job with the character and in the tenure of his character. Let me assure you that Henry's character, as much as we love Henry Rollins, but Henry's character did not survive the whole series, and we do like that. But his portrayal of a very serious and violent character was very good in Sons of Anarchy. So Henry's ability to take on serious roles, he's definitely able to do that. And I appreciated him in this role. I think he did a very good job. I just think that it's not the strongest written story as far as understanding that when you're going to tackle a biblical, vampiric, historical style role, you really have to work a little harder as the director and as the screenplay writer to understand that there are a lot of nuances that you're going to have to lock in and tie up, or you're going to have people scratching their heads at the end of this movie, which I do think happens. It happened to me, and I do think it happens to more fans, like more watchers of this movie than it should, which I do think hurts the movie overall. But it is an enjoyable time.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And like you said before, even with people thinking that, he's, this one trick kind of pony and kind of doing that kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, like I said, if any of the, anybody have ever seen him, like you said, when he was playing with Black Flag or playing with the Henry Rollins band, yeah, obviously, like you said, definitely very animated, shirt off, freaking tattoos, ripped on stage, wearing no shoes, barefoot, just,
Yeah.
just visceral raw. And then, you go and see that and you expect that when you see Henry Rollins. And then you go to one of his, like, where he, his little talks, his speakeasies and, but, he's, what's it, what they call those? The
Like a spoken word.
spoken word. Yeah. His spoken word. It's like, yeah, he throws in a little bit of anger sometimes in it, but in general, he's talking very normal and and you're just like, where's the freaking, like, veins coming out the damn neck kind of guy. But that's like I said, I love that. Where like even in this movie, it shows a lot of that. Where he's like you said, he's got the Henry Rollins, the angriness whenever he starts going after these people. He's flipping them around and fighting, and then like you said, then he's got the spoken word kind of side to him, where he's like sitting there talking to to his daughter, like you said, to his landlord, and it's just like yeah, um, okay, yeah. It's just like it's just like no, no emotion. But like I said, like I said, you think this guy's like, okay, this guy's just a dick. But like I said, once you figure out about him, you're like, okay, yeah, it's like I said, it's one of those ones
Been
where
there. He's
you've been
done
walking,
that. He's
you've been
earned
walking the
that.
world for how many millions of years, you're like, yeah, whatever. I've seen it. I've seen everything. There's nothing that you can do to me that hasn't been done to me already. So it's like one of those ones. But yeah, like I said, I always thought that was, kind of interesting. And like I said, I've always been a fan of, of him as an actor and stuff like that. He's one of those ones, like even just like in small little roles that he's done throughout his career. I always thought that it's like, where it's one of those ones where you don't believe them so much, or you're like, yeah, I don't know. But he's always been one of those actors that like, can portray a role. Yes, granted, a lot of the roles he does portray tends to usually either be, these badasses or angry people, or like you said in Sons of Anarchy, like being like a a racist and stuff like that, which is kind of
Yeah.
funny because it's like the complete opposite of who he is. You know what I mean? And
Well, he is a
especially when
well-documented friend of RuPaul.
Yeah, yeah, which is just funny because it's like, yeah, you have that where he's playing that role, and like I said, that's like which is the complete anti, opposite of what Black Flag was for. Black Flag was basically like, fuck everybody who's following all that kind of stuff, like, you know what I mean, just like one of those guys. And like you said, yeah, I mean, you know, he's one of the people that are, huge advocate of the, the LGBTQ community, which I mean, most people wouldn't think that just because he's a you know, big muscle bound guy and very angry, and I'm rocking metal and I got tattoos and I'm biker looking guy. You would think that he's like, he would be the opposite. He would be more like his Sons of Anarchy character to a
Yeah.
point, but he's like the complete opposite. And everybody who's ever talked about him said like, yeah, he's like the cuddliest cuddle bear at teddy bear ever. Like he's just, which is kind of funny because, like I said, like for at least most people from from the 90s and stuff like that, like you said, other than going back and seeing some of the Black Flag stuff, just from his portrayal in that Liar video, you're just like, dude, this guy needs to like take some Valium or some shit because he's gonna fucking have an aneurysm at one point.
No, 100%, my friend, for sure. But yeah, overall, man, he never died. It's a fun movie. It's a good time. Again, you definitely have to space out, in my opinion, your watchings of it. But I do think as a one-off, it's definitely a solid movie. But ultimately, man, how do you look at it, my friend? How do you like your score?
Yeah, for me, like I said, like I said, I've liked this movie. I remember like when it first came out, it coming out, it had a cool, like a cool, like poster for it with, with Henry Rollins and the wing, the angel wings and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, yeah, like I said, I've always been a fan of him, like musically and, and personally and stuff like that. And I've always liked a lot of his movies. So I was like, cool, I'll check it out and stuff like that. And like, it had a lot of good things. But like you said, I mean, it definitely is a movie that, like I said, I don't like I can't say that I hate it because
Yeah.
I really do love it. I do enjoy it. It's just like I said, it's just sometimes when you're watching it, or sometimes you're just kind of leaves you wanting a little bit more for some reason. And like I said, I'm not 100% sure what that more needed to be. It just felt like it needed more for some reason. But like to me, I always thought it was a solid film. I always liked it. Like I said, I've enjoy it every time I've watched it. Like I said, I haven't watched it that many times, but I've watched it a few times and then
Mhm.
rewatching it for the showdown again. So for me, like I said, I mean for me, I think it's a good solid seven. I think a seven
Yeah.
is a good mark for that because like I said, it's a good movie. It's fun. It's got a really cool kind of original concept because we haven't really got too many. I mean, there's a lot of biblical movies and stuff like that and things where references, but you don't get too many of the Cain and Abel, and then adding extra stuff, and then throwing a little bit of the tidbits of him possibly being Vlad the Impaler at some point. So I thought that was kind of cool. But yeah, I think seven's a pretty good solid score for it.
I think that's good, man. Yeah, no, I'm definitely with you, Devil, on that one. Like, I was leaning more towards a 6.5, but I don't hate your logic on that 7.0. So I'm definitely in that 6.5 to 7
Yeah,
range, and I'm definitely open with that. Yeah, like you said, it leaves a little bit more questions than answers. I feels like it doesn't explain things like it should. When we were talking about, sequels, prequels, I'll admit, I kind of wouldn't hate a prequel in this particular case. I think that would have been a cool direction. Who knows? Maybe somebody will go that one where maybe they'll call it, Why He Never Died kind of a thing, which actually I think would be kind of a cool title for a prequel to this
yeah,
particular movie. I think would be so I would like that personally, where like you had already said, we talk a lot about, is there a sequel? Yes, there is a sequel. Did we need it? Did we want it? Is it warranted? I kind of wouldn't hate a sequel slash prequel to this movie. And me personally, I would kind of lean more towards a prequel because even with a few of the I's and T's undotted and uncrossed, I feel like it would loosen that a little bit if we understood a little bit more backstory. So yeah, I like it myself at a 6.5, but I'm very open to the 7 because I love what you were saying about a unique concept because I definitely agree with that. There aren't movies out there that deal with this kind of biblical, there's vampiric movies out there that are dedicated to Vlad and are very referencing of Vlad, but they are clearly vampiric movies. I like the fact that this movie is very Cainish, very biblical, and also delves a little bit into that potential as well. So yeah, I like it at a 6.5 personally, but I'm definitely open to that solid bumping it up as a 7 idea. So we'll definitely circle back around when it comes to the end, when it comes to this. So getting into Suck now. This movie, just like you had said, you're 100, it's very campy. It's an incredibly fun and flirty movie. I'm not even going to beat around the bush. This is one of me and Mrs. Vamp's favorite movies. We love this movie to death. It is not going to be the real score, but in our house, this is a fucking 9 to us, but it's because it's a very high entertainment value when it comes to this particular movie. But anyway, very simplistic, very comical. Long story short, classic selling your soul style movie. Band sucks. Real, ends up that they're trying to make it. Their manager wants them to make it, but he's kind of a shitbag too. He's kind of a, well, I'll step over my mother for the better deal kind of thing, where he's not really taking them very seriously. You know, Female bass player, eye candy of the band, hanging out with friends, turns out to be questionable characters, gets into a vampire, and she ultimately becomes like the best part of the band because her sex appeal is up there. People start coming to watch the band because of her. Their songs start getting a little bit more airplay. Her ex-boyfriend, who's the lead singer and main guitarist, is also kind of this, well, this is my band and I write the music, and the other band members are kind of like, yeah, but that's not getting us anywhere. She has songs to contribute. Maybe we should go with some of her bands. And also and ultimately that's kind of what happens. And I love the idea of Malcolm McDowell playing Van Helsing at, and in this case Eddie Van Halen for that
Yeah.
clear rock and roll vibe, trying to take out the band, but also kind of ultimately understanding that it's not really the band themselves he's trying to get Dimitri Coates, who had a fantastic band that I was actually a fan of back in the day called Burning Brides, and he's now playing in a band called Off. Um, that's kind of on their, I'm not even sure if it's necessarily like their retirement tour, but it does kind of feel like they're very sparing when they play. And the lead singer is like the former lead singer of like Faith No More, and it's anyway. Dimitri plays in this band Off, that like catch them when you're able to, because they are really cool. I've never seen them live, but I've seen plenty of videos, and it's just kind of a very very cool vibe. But anyway, it's a very rock and roll driven movie. Eddie Van Helsing is going after Queenie. Queenie's responsible for turning the bass player to a vampire. But then you've also got this kind of like, you know, almost kind of like fairy godmother. But then you find out later it's a little darker character, and a bartender played by Alice Cooper, who's kind of looking out for the band and was the one that was kind of like, look, if you want to succeed, you should maybe consider these avenues.
Yeah, yeah. I thought that, like I said, I thought, I remember seeing bits and pieces of the movie. I remember seeing the cover because the cover was pretty funny. But
Yeah.
like I said, yeah. But then when I watched it, it's one of those ones where it's like, comparing, He Never Lived in this, even though I think this movie is way more fun, it's more stupid, it's more right down our alleyway. I think He Never Lived is a better movie is per se as being a movie was, because this is just like, it's you're like I said, you're not reinventing the wheel in this movie. Yeah, I mean, other than except for
This is an
selling your soul.
entertainment driven movie.
Yeah, instead of like selling your soul to the devil, you're selling your soul to a vampire instead and
Yep.
stuff like that. And I think it's kind of funny. It's like, yeah, you only hit they hit the one, the bass player first and stuff like that, and then eventually going in and stuff like that, and everyone else is like, okay, man, rules are you're not allowed to bite or snack on anybody, and then 2 seconds later, it's like the one guitarist is now a vampire, and then all of a sudden, 2 seconds later, the other two guys are vampires, and it's like, what the hell? I thought we said we weren't supposed to be turning anybody, and they're like, well, hey, shit happens. You know what I mean? It's just one of those kind of things. Yeah, and I love it. Alice's Cooper character throughout the movie, you're kind of like, yeah, is Alice playing, what would be God maybe, or somebody on a good side? But then, like you said, eventually you find out that he's a vampire too, and he's just kind of like, hey man, I'm cool with whatever choices you wanted to make, but these are, if you want to live the life of rock and roll, you probably should go down this way and stuff like that, which I thought was funny. I love the fact that it's like, like you said, McDowell playing freaking, Eddie Van Helsing, you know what I mean? So
Eddie
it's like,
Van
oh,
Halen.
yeah, Eddie Van Halen instead of Helsing, but I thought it was just kind of funny that with that. But yeah, it was just like one of those movies where it was just like it's just over the top, stupid campiness, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, he tells his one girlfriend, oh yeah, she's not in the band no more. Then all of a sudden, she goes and she's like, what the hell is she doing here? And she's like, I don't know,
It's
she
kind
got
of
here
the
somehow.
best part of this band.
Yeah, and they're like, yeah, they're like, man, they're like, yeah, this is we've sold out shows now all of a sudden, and I love the, I just love the fact that the rest of the band's kind of like blandish, and all of a sudden, like when they go to her, like her makeup is perfectly good, and the wind's kind of blowing in her face, and it's kind of reminds me of like of Wayne's World, like when the Dreamweaver. When every time they see Tia Carrere or Carreras character and stuff like that, they always kind of make her more angelic and stuff like that. So I thought that, kind of reminded me of that so much. But yeah, I thought it was a funny movie. I think it's funny where it's like I felt bad for the roadie throughout
Dude,
the whole entire
we gotta
time because
give a
he's just
shout out to Hugo's character. That
yeah.
dude is awesome.
Yeah, he's just cleaning up all the damn messes and all the stuff, and all this shit like that. He's got to clean up all the dead bodies. He's like getting ready to chop them up and stuff like
And he
that. And they're
wants to
like,
be turned into a vampire and they won't do it.
yeah, it just like they just keep on going. Like, yeah, it's like you know, oh yeah, yeah, we'll do it. I mean, he's definitely a huge reference of being like Renfield and stuff like
Yes.
that, where like he definitely thinks that he's a more important than he really is, but they're basically just using him because they don't want to clean up the mess that they're making. So it's just like, but oh yeah, 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 we'll turn you in. I'll turn you into one. Okay, cool. And then, like you said, throughout the movie, the next player gets it, guitar player gets it. Then then all of a sudden the drummer gets it, and he's just like, why the fuck are you too? He was just like, you have the singer who's getting mad because they're turning all everybody into vampires, and he's like, "What the shit, man? I told you not to bite anybody." Then you got the roadie that's mad because it's like, "Why are you turning these guys when I'm the one that's doing all the grunt work, doing everything for you, and you won't even turn me?"
Mrs. Vamp and I are such a huge fan of the quote. If we ever get to meet the actor that plays Hugo, and my God, do Mrs. Vamp and I really want to meet him because we just loved his role in that movie, is that quote, you drank the guy when when the bassist stabs the slushy straw into the neck
Yeah,
of the gas station attendant, and then she's literally like, it's not what it looks like, which becomes kind of her catchphrase every time she gets busted by Hugo or by the band feeding. And like, we just love the Hugo character. And and there's a lot of actors and actresses when you get to meet them at cons that will do a quote on what you get signed. And that was always something that Mrs. Vamp and I, if we're able to meet Hugo, really definitely wanted, is we were like, no, he has to write on our DVD or whatever we get signed, like you drank the guy. Like that just has to be a thing. But Hugo's character deserves like so much love and appreciation as the Renfield character, as this, look, I just want to be a part of the cool kids club. And no, it's never Hugo. No, no love for Hugo, never any respect for Hugo. And then, ultimately, the band is like, no, we can't live this life. We need to get back, and they ultimately fight against Dimitri Coates' character Queenie, who was the one who started it all, and they end up killing him. But then go back to this boring, like cardigan wearing life where they're just not as happy about everything. And Alice kind of reminds them, like, hey, well, if you want this lifestyle again, it's very lucrative and awesome, but it's never too late. I can bring you back. And then I love how the movie ends where it's like, yeah, but we need another drummer because the drummer was ultimately murdered by Queenie in the final showdown. And he's like, ah, you can always get another drummer, which, is so like, of course, And you also ultimately find out that, Eddie Van Halen slash in reality, Eddie Van Helson's character is basically vampire hunting these people because that he felt that Queenie murdered his girlfriend back in the 70s, where it's like, oh no, she was never murdered. I just turned her into a vampire for musical success, and she's been dominating the charts in Japan for 30
Yeah.
years. You know, so it's just kind of one of those things where it's like, well, you may hate me for what I do, but ultimately I'm keeping rock and roll alive, which is just kind of a fun kind of dynamic that I always thought was fun with this movie. And yeah, ultimately, Devil, I think you're right. When it comes to like the movie itself, He Never Died is probably ultimately a better stylistically and proper put together movie. But the thing I always love about Suck, it's not a, and don't get me wrong, it's not a shitty movie by any means, at least not in my opinion. I think it's a very well done movie, but its entertainment value is so high. It's a movie that, even if Mrs. Vamp and I weren't vampires in our own rights, the style of movies that we enjoy that are just a fun time I think would still keep this in rotation as a movie that we would watch. So again, it's in our hearts at a 9.0, but that is just not reality. But I do rank this movie at a very solid 7.5. I think the common populace of horror fans would genuinely enjoy this movie consistently and just have a good time watching it. So I do like it at a 7.5. And again, with a very solid cast. And since we didn't really get into it, a very, very cool, fun, and again, cartoonish and flamboyant Henry Rollins plays a radio DJ who basically is shitting on the band, and they ultimately take him out for it. Don't talk shit about my band, motherfucker. And it's a rap on his character.
Yeah, yeah.
Rockin' Roger.
Rock and Roger, yeah. I mean, yeah, I definitely agree with you when it comes to, because obviously this is a vampire movie. It's definitely a vampire comedy, vampire spoof film, and like I said, yeah, it's definitely not up there with Once Bitten and stuff like
Yeah.
that with the comedy, but it's definitely better than Vampire in Brooklyn and all those kind of
Oh,
ones.
yeah.
So it definitely is in that scale where it's like it's one of those ones, like where you watch, the Twilight films, and they have like vampire sucks comedies and stuff like that. Those are kind of like what it kind of reminds me of, but a better version of those. Because I thought those were kind of those spoof, but that vampire suck had its moments. But it's they're just like I said, a lot of that was just trying to do what the Wayans did with Scary
Yeah.
Movie and
100%.
trying to remake those films, but in that and it just without the Wayans magic, it never works. And like I said, I think with this movie, I think it was like that. Plus, you add a little bit of that rock and roll and that dirtiness and stuff like that. Like I said, my only gripe throughout the movie, and even from when the first time you hear the band to the very end where they're supposed to be popular, I think the band sucked. I kind of wish they would have done a better rock band because the band overall wasn't bad.
Yeah.
Like the drummer, the guitarist, the bass player, and all that. It was just the really campy and horrible lyrics, and that guy singing was just I just couldn't get into. I'm like, oh my god, these are. It's like emo to the 10th degree or some shit like that. It was just so weird. I'm like, to me, I think it would have been cooler to do more of like a more of like a hardcore rock. I mean, I understand they trying to not be cliche-ish too much with it being a metal band or something like that, but I think, especially with, with a lot of the actors that were in it, you could have, with Calico being in it, with Alice Cooper being in it, with Henry Rollins, with all these like people who were tied into the rock and metal genre. I think it would have been cool that if they would have gotten, I mean, like I said, they didn't necessarily need to get the real bands, but it would have been cool if they would have gotten like a more of like a metal band, or like I said, or did something where like, yeah, the band was that sounded like that to begin with, and then all of a sudden became like Orgy or something like that at the end. You know
Or
what I
like
mean?
be
Because they,
or using Calico as an example, Devil, like Beasto Blanco, because they
yeah,
do
yeah.
have
So
the male and female singing dynamic already.
yeah, yeah. So like I said, I can understand the crappiness of the band in the beginning, but once they started drawing in people, it's like, well, the only reason why they're drawing anybody in is because they're vampires and they're using their vampire charm to do it, because it's definitely not the music, because even when they were supposedly getting progressively better
It
as a
didn't
band,
change.
they didn't sound bad. But I do, one thing I will mention that you were talking before, I love the fact that the manager was a douche. I'm a huge fan of him from Kids in the Hall. I've always been a
Yeah.
huge fan of him, so I love that. But yeah, like I said, when you go to a 7.5, like I said, yeah, I think generally that He Never Dies is a better film and a better like, movie to watch. But ultimately, I think I think the movie is more fun. It's definitely more entertaining. You're getting a lot more out of it. You're gonna laugh. You're gonna go, okay, this is stupid. Okay, this is obscure. As long as you like the campiness and stuff like that, which a lot of people, especially people who, with all of us, because like I said, us, being huge like Troma and Full Moon and the campiness and stuff like that has always been down. So yeah, like I said, I definitely agree with the 7.5, with it edging a little bit better. Because like I said, I think if people in general, if we polled it, I think, both movies are sort of, I don't think one's more popular than the other. I think Suck probably a little bit more popular just because, you have Alice Cooper and you have that. But I think if people watched both of them and never seen them, I think they're going to like He Never Died, but I think they're going to have more fun watching Suck.
A slightly, I think it's also too, yeah, again, because He Never Died has that those questions left. I think Suck just has a
Yeah.
slightly stronger rewatchability scale, because again, especially if you're in that same niche genre that we are in, of enjoying just fun, obscure, campy movies, it just kind of has that slightly rewatchability scale. So I do think, yeah,
Yeah.
it's the way to go as a slight edge there. So, again, like we had discussed it at the end of He Never Died with like where I thought the score would be, but the strength of a quality movie. Yeah, I'm with you, man. I think a seven does its due diligence and is proper for that movie. So ultimately, Fangs and Infernos, that's the way that we're going to give it. We're going to give Suck that slight edge just due to the stylisticness of that movie, the rewatchability scale, and just the overall concepts of the movie with the cast up a little bit over He Never Died, which is again a overall probably more stylistically proper movie, but a little too many questions unanswered and curiosities kind of left that might turn into confusions. So ultimately, that's where Devil and I are going to be with this one. It is going to be victory to the vampire on this one as Suck takes out He Never Died at a 7.5 to a 7.0. But always a great time, and we really, really enjoyed this one for sure. And of course, Fangs and Infernos, we're always going to have great things coming your way. Of course, if you want to look oh so dapper, remember, we're coming out of the chilly weather. We're coming out of the vampiric weather and we're coming in to the devilish weather. So you might need to put that Vampire and Devil hoodie in the closet, but that doesn't mean you can't buy that Vampire and Devil podcast t-shirt and tank top at rockinhorror.com. Mark and Lizzie have been so good to us. We really appreciate their partnership, their courtesies, and their love. So make sure you guys are going to rockandhorror.com. Go to the Vampire and Devil collab category, and that's where you will find all of the merch for our show. And of course, do a little bit of shopping on their website as well. They have all kinds of great things for you to choose from. And all of the deals that they run work for us as well. Our buddy John has been very active lately on socials, letting you guys know about the Salem Witchboard Museum and the Witchboard Museum of Baltimore. Please get out and support these independent museums. They're absolutely fantastic, and we love John to death. Twisted Vines is awesome when it comes to decorating your lair, decorating your hellfire. It's awesome with what Chris and Saren do. We love their Ouija boards, their decor, all their little projects. So check out Twisted Vines. They're absolutely fantastic. And then, of course, we love our Brutalities. They just did an amazing collab with Coal Chamber, and Coal Chamber showed the devil some love as well when it came to him posting about the Coal Chamber tea. So definitely check out Brutalities. Their flavors are fantastic, and we love them to death. And of course, our buddy Chris with the Buffalo Bill House. It's an amazing Airbnb now. It's an amazing time. And also keep in mind that you definitely want to follow those socials, not only as a place to stay, but Chris has been very, very forward with some very, very cool stuff that he's been working on behind the scenes for events that'll be happening at the Buffalo Bill House. So definitely make sure that you guys keep an eye out on their socials for that. It's up in Perryopolis, Pennsylvania, and we really appreciate all of Chris's courtesies. But that's going to be it for us there, Fangs and Infernos. Again, we have got Suck taking out He Never Died at a slim margin of a 7.5 to a 7.0. Horns up. Fangs out.
Devil, my friend, I think we should have a little quick conversation about everybody's respectful celestial abodes, where it be my little coffin where I lay my head at night, or at times that you feel that you just want to go back down to make sure that hell's not getting out of whack while you are away. Let's talk about it. Vampire and Devil's newest partnership in Twisted Vines, our dear friends Chris and Saren Cadaver.
Oh yeah, you like scary stuff, you like horror decor, come and check out Twisted Vines. They make all the kind of cool shit, all for your house, all kinds of scary shit. They love it. You like to bring back the horror, you want to scare your neighbors, you want to conjure up a friend to talk to, you want to conjure up somebody bad, you want to do some bad stuff to them, you go to Twisted Vines and get some of their merch.
Absolutely, for sure. Everything is completely handmade by them. So if you need a little friend, maybe a round set abode, maybe you want to conduct a little evil towards a friend that was a friend, maybe no longer a friend. They have voodoo dolls they can do for you to allow for such activities. But you know how much we love our Ouija boards, my friend, and they make all of those by hand. They took care of your beloved vampire with a nice Nosferatu board, but the devil, he happens to be a Munsters fan. And not only do they do boards as traditional rectangles, but they can put a little bit of coffin flair in them.
Oh yeah, look at that coffin shape Munster board. Yeah, you wanna conjure up Mr. Herman? You wanna ask him how Pet Cemetery was? You can do it on this board. Oh yeah.
Absolutely, my friend. So again, thank you so much to Twisted Vines for partnering with the Vampire and Devil podcast, and make sure that you Fangs and Infernos are checking them out on their Facebook page, on their Instagram pages, and making sure that you are checking them out as they move around the country, showing their craft off at all of the various horror cons and oddities expos that they love to do. So absolutely, my friend, of course, man, horns up, fangs out for our friends at Twisted Vines.
Oh yeah.
All right there, Fangs and Infernos. Let's get right into a brand new Coffin Nails. I was going to go a different direction, but I decided that movie might be something I need for a different type of project later this year, so we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So I decided to go, thanks to Tubi, back down the rabbit hole of independent, kind of campy movies. This one was definitely campy. This is definitely a subpar movie. Let's talk about Vamps. Vamps with a Z. And basically you've got this poser goth, like just kind of wannabe, vampire girl who needs a roommate. And this dumb, ditzy, cheerleader girl, applies to be a roommate and basically ends up being given the position because, the poser goth girl is
brother has the hots for the cheerleader and wants, her to let her stay with them. So that's just kind of the basics of this. And then, with animals and whatnot being killed around the neighborhood, that kind of brings in the Van Helsing character, who's incredibly just tacky, airbrushed beard looking dude that tries to kill the poser vampire girl because that's who he thought it was, when ultimately the ditzy idiot cheerleader girl is in real life a vampire. He ends up taking the poser's brother hostage, and basically they're trying to rescue him. And then they end up taking his friend's hostage, which is this blue-skinned doctor guy and this just kind of idiot, third wheel moron guy. And so they're talking back and forth about hey, you give up my brother and I'll give you back your friends. Well, ultimately they're all just puppets on a string for the overall villain of this movie, which is basically a porn director who ultimately wants to go live on kind of Instagram or YouTube or whatever with an adult film featuring a werewolf getting it on with a vampire, because the blue-skinned guy in real life is a werewolf, and because of silver in his blood, that's what made his skin turn blue. But ultimately the script gets flipped, and let's just say the werewolf gets a little doggy with the villain, and that's the way it is. But the movie's below average, bad acting, look, they tried, but it just is what it is. The fact of the matter is it's another just Tubi movie out there for people to check out, and a 3.5 is all it's going to get.
Devil, my friend, I think it's time that we spill the tea. Brutalities. Vampireanddevil podcast couldn't be more excited, more humbled to let you all know that we have partnered with very dear friends of ours for a long time in Brutalities. And there's so much great stuff, so many flavors, so much to enjoy, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about it. Isn't that right there, my friend?
Oh yeah, we like it hot. Of course the Inferno likes it hot. Do you like the hot tea? Well, you might as well get some Brutality. Yeah, horror movies, puns, rock and roll, Brutality's got it all.
Absolutely. When it comes to the vampire, you know that he's going to absolutely gravitate towards that Nosferatu or that Nosferatu brew. Absolutely a favorite of mine. And we got to show a little bit love to, by all means, the biggest franchise in horror right now. That would be Terrifier. So Brutalities has brought you Terrifier. But that's just from the vampire. The devil has some favorites of his own.
Oh yeah, do you like the movie Pumpkinhead? Well, how about a little pumpkin bread for your throat holes? And like I said, with the rock and roll fans and the horror fans, Wednesday 13 fans, do you like Wednesday 13 and tea? How about a couple of those? With the Summertime Suicide and a couple other ones too. So if you like Wednesday 13 and you like the tea and you like the Brutalities, go to the website.
Absolutely. And so, of course, we like to look out for those that look out for us. We love you, Fangs. We love you, Infernos. But as a courtesy from Brutalities to be bestowed on you, we have that Vampireanddevil coupon code, don't we, my friend?
Oh, yeah. You want to save a little dough, little cheddar, maybe buy some more shit? Go on the line, Brutalities, type in Vampireanddevil, and you get 10% off your order. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. So it's getting into the chilly weather. People need to warm their bones. They need to warm what little skin they may or may not have. But Brutalities is the way to get it done. So that's the way it's going to be, because Vampireanddevil said so. Horns up, fangs out for Brutalities.